This is Monday, February the 22nd. This is American history. Well, the war has begun for the Americans. American troops are over in sufficient numbers in the spring of 1918 that America begins its offensive. Now, the overall commander of all French, British, and American troops is Marshal Foch. And Marshal Foch is going to assign the Americans to the Marne River. Now, the Marne River is the river that is closest to Paris. The Germans have just begun what is called the Second Battle of the Marne, and they have decimated the British and French troops along this area. The Americans are going to attack the Germans in this area right in here. This is what we call the Argonne Forest. It is a heavily forested region, and the Americans are going to have great success. Now, it is in Belleau Wood that most of the action will take place. Now, on this map here, this X here will represent the Marne River. This X here represents Verdun. Now, many of the black troops that will go over to the war in Europe will be assigned to the Verdun area. The probably most famous person to come out of the war was Alvin York. Alvin York, when he was drafted, told the people that he was a conscientious objector. He objected to war because war was killing. He was still sent over, and there was some concern that Alvin York would not fight. But when pressed into the Second Battle of the Marne, Alvin York's heroism will earn him the Congressional Medal of Honor. Here is a video that talks about Alvin York. Now, the role of blacks in World War I was not reported by the press. This was one of the ways in which the soldiers were discriminated against. Like the Civil War, black soldiers fought in units that were segregated. In other words, only blacks could be in the unit. Their officers were white. Now, they went to Verdun because this is where African troops from Morocco had been fighting. This video here talks about the heroism of the Harlem Hellfighters. In November of 1918, the Germans will call an armistice. An armistice is where everybody agrees to stop fighting. It is decided that the peace treaty will be held in Versailles, France. That's right outside of Paris. The armistice did not bring about a peace. To bring about the peace, the Allies were invited to the palace at Versailles. The Central Powers were not. Now, Woodrow Wilson had an idea going into the treaty as to what he wanted. He created a document which he called the 14 Points. And the 14 points outlined what Wilson wanted to do to bring about a lasting peace. The 14 points called for a realignment of Europe. The 14 points called for to end secret alliance. But the most important point was the 10th point, where Wilson called for a League of Nations, a body of all nations of the world who could stop conflicts before they occurred. Woodrow Wilson left for France in 1919. He was the first American president to leave for a foreign country while still president for a long period of time. Teddy Roosevelt had gone to Panama, but only for a day or two. Wilson made a mistake when he did not bring any Republicans with him to be on the trip. Now, at this time, the Republicans controlled the Senate, and the Senate would have to agree with whatever treaty Wilson came up with. This here is a picture of the Big Four. Now, the Big Four represented the countries that had suffered the most because of the war. Now, this is David Lloyd George right here. He is Prime Minister of Great Britain. And standing next to him is Vito Orlando, Premier of Italy. Next to Wilson is Georges Clemenceau, who is the President of France. Now, England, France, and Italy wanted money, reparation. They wanted land, mandate. They really didn't care about any of the points that Wilson proposed. The European leaders wanted money. Now, this money is called reparation. European leaders wanted mandates. This is a realignment of Europe, Asia, and Africa. Now, Wilson opposed most of these ideas, but for accepting the mandates and reparation, the countries of Europe agreed to the League of Nations. The Austria-Hungarian Empire was broken up into smaller pieces in Europe. Germany lost all of its possessions in Africa and Asia. The Ottoman Empire was broken up and given to France and Great Britain. This here talks about the end of the war. You'll notice that Russia was not invited to the Treaty of Versailles. In 1917, after the United States had declared war, but before Americans arrived in France, there was a revolution in Russia. Now, a group of Russians called Bolsheviks, or what we will call communists, led by this man, Nikolai Lenin, will overthrow the Russian Tsar. He will be imprisoned, and Lenin will become the new leader of what he calls the Union of Soviet Socialist Republic, or USSR. When Wilson returned home, he was met by opposition. Now, this is a picture of Henry Cabot Lodge. And Henry Cabot Lodge had enthusiastically supported going to war. But he was opposed to the peace treaty because he and other Republicans were not allowed to write it. There were isolationists, people who believed that America should only deal with the American problems. They were opposed to this treaty. They were opposed to this treaty because of the League. Now, Wilson might have been able to overcome the isolationists, and Wilson may have been able to overcome the Republicans. But with both groups opposed to this, he would have a most difficult time getting the treaty passed. To this end, Wilson is going to go on a whistle-stop campaign where he will go to city after city after city, and he will explain to them why the treaty is a good thing. And as he was gone longer and longer, the reception he got was better and better. But in September of 1917, while in Pueblo, Colorado, Woodrow Wilson is going to suffer a stroke. When he returns to Washington, D.C., he will suffer a second stroke. The stroke is going to paralyze him on the right side, and Wilson had a great deal of difficulty speaking. Congress will approach the president, and they said that they would pass the treaty if the League was taken out. Wilson refused, and the treaty was voted down. This here talks about those last days in the White House. Wilson hoped that the 1920 election would be a vindication. He hoped that the Democratic candidate would say, "Vote for me because I'm the treaty," and he hoped that the Republican candidate would say, "Vote for me because I'm opposed to the treaty." In November of 1920, the nation went to the polls and elected this man, Warren Harding, as President of the United States. Harding had opposed the treaty because A, no Republicans were taken away, and Harding was an isolationist. One of the first acts of the Harding administration will be to come up with a new peace treaty that will keep us out of the League of Nations.